Hi everyone, my name is Kavita and I'm from IDP IELTS in Australia. I'm so excited to welcome you to our sixth event in our IELTS from start to finish series. We're happy to see so many test takers joining us from all over the world today. So thank you for connecting and choosing IELTS. Today we welcome back IELTS expert Don Oliver, who will be running the webinar about common IELTS mistakes to avoid. So you can expect another amazing presentation today as Don will be sharing a lot of great tips and advice. As always, we will end the webinar with a short Q&A session. So if you're joining via Zoom, please submit your questions in the Q&A box. And if you're joining us via Facebook, please leave any comments you have for Don in the comments box and we will try to answer as many as we can today. The Facebook recording of today's session will be available after this, so you can catch back on anything you may have missed or any resources that I mentioned that you want to refer back to. So without further ado, Don, welcome back. It's so nice to see you again after a little while.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. It's lovely to see you too, as always. And it's really great to have a lot of people tuning in today, and I hope that I can help them, Katie. As you said, we're talking today about common IELTS mistakes and how to avoid them. Now, sometimes a test taker will do the test and they will be a little bit surprised that they did not do quite as well as they thought they would. And sometimes it's because maybe they weren't feeling very well that day. Maybe it's because there was a little bit of pressure in their life that stopped them performing well. But sometimes it's a matter of just making a few simple mistakes because they don't fully understand the test format and some of the things that are required by the test. So that's what we're looking at today. Let's see if we can help everybody understand what is really required in the IELTS test and how to avoid those simple mistakes. And we're going to look at the whole of the test. We're going to look at the mistakes that people sometimes make with listening and reading, and more with speaking, and especially with writing. So let's go through these mistakes one by one. Now, these are not in any particular order. They begin with listening and reading, and then they go to speaking. And finally, we'll talk about writing. But the first one is a very obvious one. And when you are doing your listening test or your reading test, you have to write your answer. And there are two problems there. Sometimes we make simple spelling mistakes. Now, if you make a spelling mistake on your mark sheet, in your paper and pencil test, or on the computer test, then that answer will be marked wrong, even if it's clear what you meant. So, for example, if you don't write a particular word with, if you write circle, for example, with an S instead of a C, then that would be marked as wrong. The other thing that some people do is they think that their handwriting is really good, but it isn't. Sometimes people write and they think, oh yeah, that's how I've spelt that correctly. But their O looks like an A, or their L looks like an E. Now this is a problem because the marker will say it's not perfectly clear what this test taker intended. Therefore, I must mark this answer incorrect. I suggest that you print your answer. Use block letters. It doesn't matter about capital letters. All the letters can be capitals. They can be block letters. And that will make it very clear to the marker what you intend. So two very important things when you are doing the listening and the reading test. Mistake number 2. Sometimes when you're doing the listening or reading, you have your mark sheet there and maybe you've answered 35 questions of the 40 and there are 5 blank spaces at the end. And the invigilator says, you have 1 minute left. And you think, I don't know what the answers are. Guess. Don't leave any blank spaces. If it's a multiple choice question, write A, because maybe you'll get 2 of those correct. If it's a true, false, not given, write true, because maybe you'll get a couple of those correct. If you have to guess a word or a number, guess it, because there are no penalties for getting the wrong answer, but the penalty for not answering is clear. You will not get a score. The other thing that some people do is they think, well, it could be A or it could be B. I'm not sure. I'll write down A and B. Well, maybe the answer is A, but because you wrote down A and B, both are marked as wrong. If you are asked for only one answer, only give one answer, because if you give 2, then neither of them will be marked correct. Okay. Mistake number 3. This is related to what I just said, but it's an important thing, especially in the paper and pencil test. In the paper and pencil test, your mark sheet, you have some time at the end of the listening to complete your mark sheet. And sometimes you are putting the answer on the question sheet in the listening and the reading. And then you're transferring your answer from the question sheet to the mark sheet, right? I have seen some test takers transfer the answer for question 21 into the space for question 22. And the rest follow. Now that's a big mistake because the marker must say, well, this is not the correct answer. And all of those will be marked as wrong. When you check your answers, also check for handwriting, also check for spelling, and a little bit of checking, and this goes for writing as well. Make sure that you have put the right answer in the right spot. Okay, mistake number 4. Now, here we say one mistake is not reading the listening question properly. What does that mean? Well, in the listening, you are given time to read the question. The recording will say, now you have some time to read the questions for questions 1 to 5, or questions 25 to 30, right? Some test takers fail to use that time well. Now, what do I mean? If you use your time well in reading the questions in listening, you will be doing these things. You'll take the full 20 seconds or 30 seconds to read the question. You will be looking for key words that you want to hear in the recording or a synonym for those words. You will be understanding the situation that they're talking about. You'll understand who is talking, where they are talking, what they are talking about. You will be able to maybe predict some of those answers. You'll be able to predict the type of word that you need to put in the answer. You'll be able to think of 2 questions at the same time, because remember, in the listening test, you only hear the recording once. So if you miss that first question, you've got to be ready to answer the next question. So having a couple of questions in your mind at the same time is a good strategy. If you miss one of them, you'll get to the next one. So that is what I mean by reading the listening question properly. And sometimes they will say answer in no more than one word, or answer in no more than 2 words. So you know that you cannot write 2 words if they want only 1 word, or 3 words if the question asks for only 2 words. That is reading the listening question properly. The similar thing is for the reading, but there are a few differences. You have plenty of time to read the reading question because it's up to you when you start reading the text. But I would always recommend that you read the questions before you look at the text. Quickly, look at the questions, because the questions will sum up in some ways what the passage is about. And as with the listening, you should be able to find some key words in the question. What do they want to know about? Oh, they want to know about this country. They want to know about this disease or that machine. You should be able to predict some of the answers. You should be able to predict the type of word that you need to supply. You will also know how many words you are allowed to write, because it will say answer in only 1 word or answer in up to 2 words, for example. And the other thing is, with the answers that you write down for the reading, the word that you will write down is in the passage. So you should have no excuse for misspelling the word. They will say, complete this with a word from the passage. Not always, but in some questions, they will ask you to do that. So reading the question properly in the reading test is an important skill. Okay. Mistake number 6. Sometimes in the reading, people will try and read every word. They won't look at the questions first. They will start to read the passage, and they will read every word. Now, each passage in the academic reading is about 900 words. That's about 2,500 words in total. You don't have time to read all those words, unless, of course, you are a very, very good reader. If you're a native speaker, you might do this because you can read quickly. But if English is your second language, then you need to try and read as efficiently as you can. That means to read as quickly as you can with comprehension. So don't try and read every single word. Practice skimming. And when you practice skimming, this is something you do in your own language. When you look at the newspaper, you don't read every word on the front page, do you? You find something that's interesting, not by reading every word, but by finding 1 or 2 words in it that look interesting. That is skimming. And then you'll be practicing scanning because you've looked at the questions and you've found some key words, and you'll be looking for those key words. Sometimes you do need to read every word, but not always. If, for example, the question is quite hard, like true, false, and not given, and if the answer is not given, and you can't see if it's true or false, you need to read every word there. But that's only sometimes, and it's not most of the time. We've had 6 mistakes so far, and we have 13 to go. Now, this sounds like a very obvious thing. In speaking, people are not pronouncing their words correctly. Well, Okay, everybody knows that. It's hard to pronounce a foreign language correctly. But you would be surprised that very many people whose first language is not English and whose first language does not have some English sounds in it seem not to practice those sounds. I'll give you some examples. I worked in the Middle East for a long time, and if your first language is Arabic, you never say p, do you? You don't say p, you say b. You think, well, that all sounds the same, but it doesn't sound the same. People and people are different. Now, this is an important thing if your first language is Arabic, and it's something that you can practice. You can learn how to make that p sound. If, for example, your first language is Korean, it's hard to say a word like lunch because you always want to put a vowel at the end. You want to say lunchy, right? Because your language doesn't have what we call a consonant cluster at the end. You can practice it. If your first language is Vietnamese, it's very common for you to forget to say the ending of an English word because this is not so important in your language. So if you're trying to say happened and you say happened, then the examiner will think, well, that's a mistake in tense. You used the present tense instead of the past, but it was a pronunciation. So this is an important thing. Think about the problems that you have with pronunciation and practice, because if you practice them, you will perfect English pronunciation. You will be able to pronounce all the sounds of English. Okay, so do that. The other part of pronunciation, and this is a very common mistake, if you've seen the public version of the assessment criteria for speaking, and I hope you have, and if you haven't, please download it from IELTS.com or IELTS Essentials, our website. Look at the assessment criteria for pronunciation. And at a band 8, it says, this candidate uses a wide range of pronunciation features. Now, part of that is the sounds of English, right? P and b and a and e and all of that. But it is mostly about the intonation, the way your voice is used to express meaning. Intonation is one half of the mark for your pronunciation. The examiner wants to hear you speak naturally and expressively. So expressing meaning in English, and if you listen to my voice, you'll hear that some words are stressed, some words, and you'll hear that my voice goes up when I'm trying to tell you something that's quite important. And when I finish, it goes down. All of these are pronunciation features that the examiner is listening for. So practice those. Practice intonation, and that will help you get a high score in pronunciation and improve your speaking score. We're halfway through. Mistake number 9. Now, in the speaking test, the examiner will ask you a question. And the question might be, well, can you tell me about the sorts of new movies that you like? And you answer, the sorts of movies that I like are. Now, if you continue to do this, to simply take the words that the examiner gives you and use them, You can do that sometimes, but if that's what you're doing all the time, then the examiner will think, well, this person does not have a very wide range of words. So practice using some different words. What sort of movies do you like? Well, I love lots of types of movies. That's a better answer. Or, well, my favorite movie is. Here, you are giving the examiner a good reason to give you a good score for your lexical resource. That's one of the 25% of the mark. Your lexical resource is your vocabulary. Show the examiner that you have good vocabulary. Okay. Next common mistake is failing to extend your answers in the speaking. And an easy way to extend your answer in the speaking test is to always say why. What sports do you like? Well, I love football because I like team sports and I used to play football when I was at school. Give examples in the speaking test. What sports do you like? I like football because I played football at school and I like team sports. For example, other types of team sports like hockey. I like them as well. Here, you are giving the examiner a good reason to give you a good score because you can speak at length. And this is one of the assessment criteria. Are you willing to give more? And the more you give, the better. And on this subject, some test takers get worried when the examiner stops, when the examiner interrupts. They're speaking, and the examiner says, and can I ask you another question? That's good. If the examiner interrupts you, that means you're doing well because you are giving a long answer and the examiner wants to get on to another question, wants to get on to a different topic. So don't be worried about that. It's not being rude. It's actually a compliment to you if the examiner interrupts. Okay. This is a mistake that some people make, and it's such an obvious mistake. You don't want to do this. You're talking and you can't think of a word, right? And you say, how you say, that's no good. That's bad English. Practice making a question like that in perfect English. I'm not sure how I should describe this thing, but, or if you're asking the examiner to repeat something, don't say again. No. Say, I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. Would you say that again, please? This is good. This is an opportunity for you to actually give something that you have practiced, which is perfect, and which will tell the examiner that you have good grammar. So make sure that you practice a few phrases for asking the examiner to repeat or asking the examiner to explain. I'm sorry, did you mean this or did you mean that? Or could you please explain that a little more? That's good. Mistake number 12. This is this is such an important part of the speaking. You know, in part 2 of the speaking, you have to speak for 2 minutes. And you have to speak about a simple topic. So some people think, well, that's easy. I can talk about a famous person, or I can talk about a place where I like to go to, or I can talk about a useful piece of equipment that I sometimes use. But for 2 minutes, it's quite difficult. And especially if there are any native English speakers listening now, especially for you, it's a very wise thing to practice making good notes before you speak. You're given 1 minute to make notes. Now, if you practice making good notes, that will make the part 2 much easier. And good notes are not an essay, not sentences. It's maybe 10 words. Where this came from, who I was with, what I did, when, how I felt, etc. If you do that, and you've written down 10 words, you could speak for 5 minutes. You could speak for 10 minutes about those things. About each of those words, you could speak for 30 seconds. So do that. Practice making good notes at the beginning of your part 2. And the other thing is you will be much more relaxed about part 2. And if you look at the assessment criteria for the speaking, the first criterion is fluency and coherence. And one of the very important elements in that is how much effort you need to produce language. If you're able to produce it with not much effort, if you're able to do it in a relaxed way, you will get a higher score for your fluency. Okay, let's go on to mistake number 13. Now remember, we had not reading the listening question properly, not reading the reading question properly, and now we have not reading the writing question properly. And this is one of the biggest mistakes that anyone makes. Task 1, if you're doing general training, task 1, some people misunderstand the purpose of the letter. This is a very important thing. You need to understand why you are writing this letter in general training, task 1. You need to know who you're writing to and what the 3 points are that you should address. In academic, task 1, sometimes people do not read or understand the task very well. They haven't practiced looking at graphs. They haven't practiced looking at a table of figures. They haven't practiced looking at maps. These are all task 1 tasks. Do that and make sure you spend at least 2 or 3 minutes understanding what the task is in writing. In task 2, there are sometimes an easy question. To what extent do you agree? That's easy. Sometimes there is a difficult question. What are the reasons for this? And do the advantages outweigh the disadvantages? That's a more difficult question. Discuss both views and give your own opinion. That's a difficult question. Spend a couple of minutes understanding the question so that you are able to fully answer. That's what you have to do in the writing. And many people forget to do that. Let's continue. Mistake number 14. In writing, the second assessment criterion is coherence and cohesion. It's 25% of the mark. What does it mean? It means that what you have written is well organized. It means it is logically organized. It means it begins with an introduction, it continues with a topic, addressing a topic in one paragraph, going on to another element of that topic or a different topic in the next paragraph, finally concluding. When we do this, we have to use paragraphs to help the reader, to show the reader that yes, our introduction has finished. And now I'm going to talk about this. And next I'm going to talk about that topic. And finally, I am going to sum up what I've said. Paragraphs are an important part of writing because without them, the reader will be a little bit confused. So paragraphs are not difficult, really. When you think, okay, I finished that thought, now I'm going to have another thought, start a new paragraph. And remember, paragraphs are important in general training, letters, task 1, also important in academic, task 1, and also in task 2 for both general training and academic. So whenever you write in paragraph. And by the way, while we're talking about this, make sure they are full paragraphs. In other words, don't put dot points in there. Don't put numbered lists in there. Don't use subheadings. Don't do that. You want full sentences, full paragraph. Okay. The next mistake that some people make is using the incorrect format in writing. And really, I've just talked about that. Format is different to what I was talking about in terms of paragraphing. Format is those things I just mentioned about bullet points, numbered lists, subheadings. You must use full sentences and full paragraphs when you write an IELTS essay. And I know in some disciplines at university, using bullet points is okay. Using numbered lists is okay. Using subheadings is okay. In some disciplines, but not all. Make sure, though, that in the IELTS writing, it's always full sentences and full paragraphs. We're nearly at the end of this, and we're going to finish with a beautiful little video that sums up a lot of the writing tips that I'm giving you and adds a couple more. But here, this mistake number 17 is maybe one of the most common problems with writing. And this is not addressing the question fully. Now, I've already talked about this to some extent, but let me expand it. In task 1 writing, you need to be able to give the main features, not every feature, and you need to be able to supply an overview, which is a general statement of the main features. This is describing the graph or the table of figures or the diagram fully. So don't forget to include the key features. Don't forget to include an overview in academic task 1. In general training task 1, don't forget to include all of the bullet points that you are asked to address in the task. If you leave out one, you will only get a band 4 for that first criterion. In task 2, it's equally important to find out, to work out for yourself, how many things do I have to cover? Do I have to discuss both views? Or can I just discuss one view? Do I have to give one solution? Or do I have to give several solutions? Do I have to agree or disagree? Do I have to simply discuss? Do I have to weigh the two possibilities and see if one is more important than the other? or if there are more advantages than disadvantages, you must read the question very carefully in order to address the question fully. Mistake number 18, presenting an unclear position. Now, this is something that happens a lot in task 2 writing. In task 2 writing, one of the assessment criteria is that a position is presented that is clear. What does it mean? Well, a position means what you think. Don't say there are many sides to this question. Don't say this is a big problem without saying what you think. I think, I believe, in my opinion. Use these words in your task 2 essay because that is what the examiner is looking for. Phew. We have only one more mistake to look at and then our video. And this really applies to all the written parts of the written test, reading, listening, but especially with writing. You should spend a couple of minutes looking at the question at the beginning and quickly making a plan, and spend a couple of minutes at the end checking for spelling errors and grammatical errors, the sorts of errors that you often make, articles, maybe, tenses, maybe, prepositions, maybe, and especially if you are doing the computer delivered test, there may well be typographical errors, typos. With your fat fingers, sometimes you don't write T-H-E and you write T-E instead of the. This is a simple mistake. I do it all the time. Therefore, it's important to check your work, especially if it is the computer delivered IELTS. You're spending a little bit of time doing that, you'll find that it may increase your score by half a band. Okay, we're going to now look at our beautiful video, which I promised you.
Hey IELTS test.
There we are. Now I'm going to pause it very quickly. That's good, because I just want to introduce it. Now this is a video that we produced, IDP, and it's one of many videos that are available to you if you go to our YouTube channel. So this sums up what you need to do if you want to avoid similar mistakes in the writing, okay? In writing task 2. Let's listen to it.
Hey IELTS test takers. We're here today to tell you about 7 mistakes that could be preventing you from scoring a band 7 or higher in IELTS writing task 2. You're welcome to pause the video and read as we move through the essay example. Test takers sometimes wonder why they scored the way they did in the IELTS writing test and become frustrated with their writing band score. We are going to show you 7 mistakes that test takers make that prevent a higher band score. We will also show you the features that the examiner looks at when assessing your essay and deciding the band score. Let's fix this essay and turn it from a band 5 into a band 7. Mistake number 1. Not enough paragraphs. This is a very easy mistake to make, but it's very costly. Look at what the band descriptors say. In this essay, there are only 2 paragraphs. One very long one with a number of ideas, and a 1-sentence concluding paragraph. Solution: fix paragraphing and make the 1-sentence paragraph into 2 sentences. Mistake number 2. Incorrect format. Task 2 essays must be written in essay format using paragraphs to show your introduction, body paragraphs, and conclusion. This is an easy mistake to make if you are rushing. Look at what the band descriptors say. Solution: remove the numbers. Mistake number 3. Partially addressing the question. Take time to read the question carefully and decide how many parts are in the question. For this 3-part question, you need to discuss both views and give your own opinion. This is a 3-part question, but they only agreed that wild animals should not be in zoos. They did not give you any reason why animals should be kept in zoos. They only addressed 2 parts of the question, and their opinion is not very clear or supported. Solution: include the other viewpoint. There are good reasons for having zoos, and make your opinion clearer. Mistake number 4, presenting an unclear position. According to the band descriptors for task response, the writer of this task would have received a band 4. To receive a better mark, you need to decide on your position and maintain it throughout the response. Solution: make sure that the examiner knows what you are thinking. Mistake 5, spelling errors and typos. Have a look at the band 5, 6 and 7 criteria for lexical resource. The writer of this task would have scored between a band 5 and a band 6. To have improved their score, they needed to spell correctly. Remember that a typo is a spelling error. Remember, computer-delivered IELTS does not have a spell check function. Before your IELTS, you should practice commonly misspelled words. For example, solution: correct your spelling and typos. Mistake 6, using inappropriate memorised language, phrases and cliches. When they're marking your writing task, the examiner is looking for memorised language, so don't use it. Memorised language is easy to identify, so use your own words and avoid overused phrases like these. Solution: remove memorised language and use your own words to express your ideas clearly. Mistake 7, using surveys and research to support your opinion. For our final step, you need to use real examples and evidence from your own life experience. Examiners cannot check if your research and survey examples are real. They do not support your response appropriately. Solution: remove the false research and include your own examples. With that final mistake fixed, let's take a look at our transformed Band 7 essay. Thanks for watching. We hope you have learned something about the IELTS writing task too. Avoid these 7 mistakes and you'll be on your way to a Band 7 result for writing task 2.
Okay, so wasn't that interesting? And it really summed up a lot of the things that we were talking about earlier on. So what I'd like to finish with now, before we get to the questions, is to just remind you that you can find a lot of help from us at our website, official website. Go to our Facebook page. You can ask questions there and read the answers to questions that have already been asked. You can learn a few things on TikTok and all sorts of other things that I'm too old to really be into. So there is, I must actually remind you, there is another bonus YouTube webinar next week, and there'll be more information about that later on. Okay, so KD, we're ready for questions. What have you got for me?
Yes, thank you, Don. First of all, just wanted to say, as always, another amazing presentation. So many amazing tips. So let's get to the questions now. We've got some around writing. So someone asked, should we type or write answers in capital letters?
It's up to you. If your writing is clear, write as you like. If you find writing in capital letters is too slow, well, don't do it. But there is no penalty. If you write all of your writing in essays, in the writing test in capitals, fine. If you write your answers in the reading and the listening in capitals, fine, okay?
Great, thanks for that. And does this also apply for cursive handwriting?
You can write with running writing, cursive writing is not a problem, but make sure it is clear, okay? That's all.
Oh, good. Thank you for that. Next question is about word limit. So someone asked, what if I exceed the word limit? Will I lose marks?
In the writing test, those word limits, 150 words for task 1 and 250 words for task 2, are minimums. There is no maximum. You could write 300 words for task 1 and 500 words for task 2, but I recommend that you do not, because if you write so many words, then you can make many more mistakes, and probably your essay will lose its focus, and you won't have time to check your work. Now, some candidates do this. They think more is better. That's not true. I would recommend something like 170 words for task 1 and maybe 270 words for task 2.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. Someone else asked, what should I take into consideration when aiming for a Band 7 score?
Well, the first thing you should do is look at the assessment criteria for speaking and writing, which you can find on our website. And it's quite clear what you need to do in the 4 criteria for both speaking and writing to get a Band 7. But speaking generally, to sum it up, a Band 6 can make quite a few spelling errors and quite a few grammatical errors, but we still understand what the person means. At a Band 7, there are far fewer spelling mistakes, far fewer grammatical errors. At Band 8 and 9, hardly any. So if you're making maybe 10 spelling mistakes in your writing, you won't get a Band 7 for lexical resource for that criteria. You're making 10 grammatical errors, you won't get a 7 for your grammatical range and accuracy. Okay.
Good tip, Don. Another question from someone asking about the speaking test. What do I do if I don't know much about the topic?
Yeah, first of all of the topics are already trialed with many people to find out if they are accessible. We will never ask a question about politics, never ask a question about religion. So those sorts of questions are out. But the sorts of things that an educated person talks about, like education or health or city planning or the environment, all of these things you are expected to be able to talk about. And remember, you don't have to be an expert. You can speak very fluently and very well about how you don't know anything about something. For example, what should the government do to improve the air quality in your city? Well, I'm not a scientist, and I really don't know, but I imagine that you might be able to stop cars and industry emitting gases. That's a fine answer. You don't need to actually give an expert answer.
Great advice, Don. Few people have asked for some practical tips about speaking and improving their vocabulary. What's your advice, Don?
Improving vocabulary, I think, is critical for every part of the test. The more words you know, the easier the listening will be. The more words you know, the easier the reading will be. The better your speaking will be, the better your writing will be. So how do you learn words? Everyone who's listening to me has learned a lot of words because they're understanding what I'm saying. But I would recommend you also try and learn phrases and learning words that are related to each other. So if you find a good word, for example, vicinity. Now this is not such a common word. It means in the neighborhood. when I use the word vicinity, I say in the vicinity of. Now I've learned 4 words there. I've learned a preposition and another preposition, in and of, and I've learned that we use the definite article, the. Now this is very helpful because not only have I learned a word, I've learned some good grammar with it. So when I use that word in my essay or in my speaking test, the examiner will say tick for lexical resource, tick for grammar. So that's what I would suggest.
Thank you, Don. And we've got another speaking question. For question 1 in the speaking module, can I use words like, you know, yeah, yep, like we usually do when having a conversation?
Yes, you can. The speaking test is a little formal because it's a test, but it's not very formal. And basically, the sort of interaction that you are having with the examiner is a very relaxed one. Leave it at yeah and you know. Don't go into some, don't use swear words or anything like that. It's not that informal. You're not talking to your friend at the pub. So maintain a sort of formality. But if you say, yeah, you know, that's fine, not a problem.
Perfect. On that note, we also had another question about hand movement. So does it matter if they make hand movements during the speaking test?
It doesn't matter at all. Some people speak with their hands, some people do not. There is no assessment of body language, okay? So even if you are looking the other way, that is not assessed. So, but remember, the examiner wants you to succeed and wants you to be relaxed. So relax. Share eye contact with the examiner, smile. Use your hands if you want to, not a problem.
Good to know. So another question from someone here. How does one practice intonation? Like, do you have any tips, Don?
Yeah, there are lots of techniques for doing this. Imitation is an important thing. And there is a technique called shadowing, where you listen to something and you say it as the person says it. Of course, you need to listen a lot so that you know what's coming next and you sort of rehearsing a sort of a script almost. Some people recommend you do this while you walk because the walking and the movement and the rhythm of that can help you have a good rhythm when you speak. And rhythm is a part of the assessment in the speaking test. It's a pronunciation feature. So if you're able to maintain a natural rhythm, if you're able to show that you are able to produce natural intonation, and remember, intonation is all about conveying meaning. So it's when you stress something, that is a word that should be stressed. You wouldn't stress, you know, you would stress a dog, right? So you have to be careful about that. But that's where imitation comes in. So you imitate native speakers who are talking about something you're interested in and imitate again and again and again. And frankly, it's the easiest thing in the world now with YouTube. So take advantage of it.
Thanks, Don. Another one, in speaking part 2, if I don't cover all the questions on the cue card, although I've spoken for the full 2 minutes, is that okay?
That's okay. In writing, you have to answer the question fully. In speaking, you do not. Speaking assessment does not have that criterion in it. The examiner will make a different assessment of your writing compared to your speaking. And that is because in speaking, the examiner is in control and they can tell you, well, no, I actually want you to answer that question, not this question. So In part 2, those points that are given to you are a suggestion only. If you want to look at only one of them, if you want to look at, in fact, none of them, that's okay. The assessment is made on the quality of your speech. But finally, Katie, I would say, if the task is please describe some equipment that you find useful, don't talk about dinosaurs because you love dinosaurs, because then the examiner will say, well, first of all, maybe they don't understand the word equipment, so their lexical resource is not good, or maybe they've rehearsed this, so I will just ignore them. Okay.
Well, that brings me to the next question. Someone asked, can I use personal examples in my writing and speaking test?
Yes, you should, always. In the writing, you're asked to express a position and to support it with your evidence from your own experience. You are told that. So if you're talking about the effects of pollution, for example, you can say, where I live, the pollution is quite good, quite bad. For example, you know, I have to boil the water. In speaking, using your own experience is fine, especially in part 1, because that is the focus. What do you like to do? What do you wear? What food do you like? Etc. In part 3 of the speaking mode, the examiner will move you from the personal onto the general. So the examiner might ask a question like, well, you know, is the education, primary education in your country effective? And you will start by saying, well, my experience with primary education. The examiner will let you speak, but then the examiner will say, well, did most people have this experience in your country? In other words, the examiner wants you to then speak generally, and that is the focus of part 3 of the speaking. Okay.
Yeah, cool. That's great. Another question from a test taker. How can I improve my academic vocabulary for writing tasks? Most of the newspapers and magazine articles are not ideal. So any suggestions, Don?
Yeah, there are. The academic writing is not very academic. It's called academic writing, but really the assessment is in lexical resource is basically, are you able to use words naturally? Are you able to use less common words, not necessarily technical words? And are you able to use idiomatic language? Idiomatic language means really just combinations of words that are natural in a native speaker. If you read academic papers, and I have read a lot of academic papers, you'll find the actual writing is very poor most of the time. It's not very clear. So don't use an academic paper as a model for an IELTS essay. A better model would be something like an opinion piece in a newspaper, someone expressing an opinion in a news magazine. And if you really want good examples of those things, you can go to newspapers like The Guardian, or to English language newspapers in your own country, or online, look at The Economist or New Scientist and things like that. That is perfectly good vocabulary for a writing task too.
Thanks, Don. Someone wanted your opinion. I haven't taken the IELTS test yet. Is it better to try one first without any preparation to understand what I need to work on?
It's expensive. I would suggest it's cheaper to actually look at a few practice tests from. I mean, you can buy a practice test book for about, I don't know, in Australia probably about $30, as opposed to $300 and something for the actual test. But KD, as you know, we have the progress check,
Yes.
which is a very useful way of assessing whether you are ready to do the actual test. And that's much cheaper than the real test. And you can find details of that on KD.
IELTS.com.au or IELTS Essentials.
Very good.
So we're running out of time, so I'll ask my last two questions. One comes from a test taker who wants to know, because a teacher told this test taker that they should use synonyms to avoid repetition, like realm for area, but it looks awkward to write rural realm. So what are your thoughts, Don?
Yes. It goes back to what I said about learning vocabulary. If you learn one word like realm and you learn another word like rural and you try and put them together, it doesn't work because no one ever puts those words together. But if you do learn the word rural and you learn it in a sentence, you might find that you can join that word to rural area or rural industry or rural lifestyle. So that is an important thing, learning words in combinations. The question that the idea you began with was that we should use synonyms. Well, that's true, but you should have more than one way of talking about a thing. But in English, the word realm, the word area, the word territory, the word vicinity, all of those have slightly different meanings. And that's why you have to learn the adjective that goes with the noun, the adverb that goes with the adjective, the preposition which goes before the noun, if there is one, etc.
One last question, Don, before we wrap up. So besides the speaking test, is it possible to use idioms in the writing task too?
Yes, but be careful of idioms because idioms cover a wide range of things. Idioms can be phrasal verbs. Like, what did you get up to on the weekend? Get up to on the weekend. That's a normal way of speaking. It is idiomatic though, because we can combine those words to create a new meaning. There are other idioms like there's not enough room to swing a cat here. Well, don't use those because, first of all, they are too idiomatic. They are not formal enough, and you are likely to misuse them because you can only use a lot of those idioms in a particular context, and some of them you can only use in the negative, and you'll try and use it in the positive, and all sorts of complications. So stick to phrasal verbs, understand how they're used, and that is idiomatic enough for you.
That's great. Thanks so much, Don. Well, that wraps up our session for this evening. So thank you all for joining us for today's webinar. We truly appreciate your time, and thank you to everyone who joined us and asked a question. If we didn't get the chance to answer your question, make sure to message us and we will answer it. So have a great day, everyone.
Okay, thank you everyone, and thank you KD. See you later.